Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking On Braves Boys podcast. Got some big news on returners for Notre Dame. These three were kind of the more obvious ones, but Mike Bray did confirm them on the Mike Bray show regarding Prentiss Hubb, Cormac Ryan, and Dane Goodwin. I'll read the quotes out from Bray's show about Prentiss Hubb. He said he will move on with a professional career, and he gave us everything we had. He's like a son to me. I will miss him, but it's time. All but confirming that Prentiss Hubb's career at Notre Dame will be over and he's going to move on. For months, we've kind of known that it was time for Prentiss Hubb to move on. Notre Dame needed to move on in terms of their point guard play and their offense in the backcourt. And Prentiss Hubb kind of needed to move on just in terms of his life. Like Bray said, it was time for him to go. And I think it's Notre Dame certainly going to have a hole to fill in terms of point guard play. And I'll get more into that in a minute, but all season you kind of knew that it was time and Prentiss was probably done. Even as early as like November, we kind of knew that this was going to be it for Prentiss Hubb. And he really redeemed himself at the end of his senior year, and that's certainly something to be proud of. Offensively, I don't think he quite had the year he wanted to, but really righted the ship offensively and was a big reason that Notre Dame was in the position they were in throughout the year. Averaged 4 assists a game and was much better towards the end of the year at not turning the ball over and taking care of it and finding guys. Maybe the biggest reason Notre Dame's offense flowed like it was because they had two creators in Prentiss Hubb and Blake Wesley. He had 36% from the field throughout the season, and if you told me that going into the year, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And we didn't even think it was that horrible of a year for Prentiss Hubb just because of all the other things he did. And I think that's a huge development and a huge testament to what Prentiss Hubb kind of became throughout his career. I think maybe, I'm not sure the stats will back me up on this, but his best scoring year was probably his sophomore year. I know he had all those explosive performances like the FSU game. I think one of the UNC games he had a big afternoon. And overall, just I felt like was much more explosive offensively. But this year might have been one of his more valuable years in terms of his value to the team. Overall, had 0 turnovers in the Rutgers game in March Madness. A turnover in that game would have killed Notre Dame, although he didn't shoot it that well. Alabama had 1 turnover in a really fast-paced game. And Texas Tech had 2 turnovers against one of the best defenses in the country and really turned into what a Mike Bray point guard supposed to be, 4 assists per game. And see the turnovers. I'm assuming they're nowhere really near that. He averaged 4 assists per game and 1.5 turnovers a game. And at times throughout his career, that number was a lot closer. Last year was 5.8 to 3.2 and really developed into what Mike Bray wanted him to be, which was the distributor, the guy who ran the show, was the leader. And Prentiss Hubb was probably the biggest leader on this team this year. And a lot of the reason that this locker room kind of stayed above water even through the bad times throughout the year. Prentiss is the guy who made them kind of embrace the underdog mentality and kind of allowed them to form an identity of a fiery team rather than a team that's kind of just going to curl up in a ball and go away after they lose a few big ones. And Prentiss Hubb's leadership is certainly a testament to why they were able to turn it around. And also his ability to close games is going to be missed for Notre Dame. Prentiss had probably 3 or 4 games throughout the year. They pop on the game log. He had 3 or 4 games throughout the year where they don't win without a late bucket from Prentiss Hubb. Even games that don't look that close, Prentiss Hubb would hit the dagger in those games and really turn it around for Notre Dame and allow them to escape. And throughout the year, kind of my theme in the post games was Notre Dame keeps finding a way to win. And a lot of that had to do with Prentiss Hubb's late game heroics overall throughout the year. A ton of shots that Prentiss wouldn't hit throughout the game. He would hit late in the game that when they really mattered. And Notre Dame would not be a tournament team without Prentiss Hubb's late heroics. And they're certainly going to miss that. They're going to miss having a true point guard as well. I know people love to rag on Prentiss Hubb because of his field goal percentage, and that's for good reason. Prentiss Hubb was a top 100 recruit and never quite turned into what they thought he could as a scorer, but he turned into one of the better distributing true point guards in the country, and he didn't give you all that much offensively at times in terms of scoring, and he didn't give you great defense at times, but the way he ran the show and kind of led this team was huge. And having two primary distributors in Prentiss and Blake last year, both of them being gone, is going to be a big gap that Notre Dame has to fill. And I talked about Prentiss in the transfer portal video just because Notre Dame has put an emphasis on replacing Prentiss, basically. And although it wasn't really public, you could really tell that Prentiss was not going to be back. And Notre Dame's going to have a big hole to fill in terms of a guy who can really get them into what they want to get into and understand what Bray wants them to be offensively. And they're going to have to find that in the portal, and that's tough to do in this landscape of college basketball. There's a reason these guys are in the portal. And Hubb had a really solid career at Notre Dame, although the stats don't look as great towards the end of his career. Still made probably just as big of an impact as he did early in his career. And Hubb will probably end up playing overseas somewhere, and wish him the best of luck, obviously. He was a big reason that Notre Dame was able to right the ship throughout the year, having somewhat normal Prentiss Hubb back after his pretty brutal start to the season throughout pretty much all of the 2021 part of the season was a big reason Notre Dame really couldn't get it going. And when Prentiss started hitting shots when they mattered, when he started kind of getting the offense under control, he was a big reason that Notre Dame turned it around. And certainly can't take what Prentiss had for granted. It's one of those situations where maybe the grass isn't that much brighter green on the other side. Certainly they're going to get more production, I think, out of a point guard next year, depending on who that is. I think they're probably going to get more efficiency, obviously, and more traditional scoring ability from their point guard, but I think that they're going to have a tough time replacing what Prentiss did for their offense. And the 4 assists, I think, is a little misleading considering they had Blake to go beside him. But Prentiss was a guy who really brought Blake along and a guy who helped Notre Dame run what they wanted to run all year and was a big part of their success. So moving on to Cormac Ryan, he will be returning, and I think Cormac can really plug a lot of the gaps in terms of leadership, locker room, stuff like that Prentiss is going to be leaving. Cormac is really important that he returns. And I've been beating this drum that Cormac Ryan has more in the tank offensively for years, and now is the time for him to show it. He showed in the Alabama game with good defenders on him as well, with Keon Ellis on him. Obviously, Jaden Shackelford isn't that caliber of a defender, but Cormac really showed what he could do off the bounce against athletic defenders that day. And we've seen that in spurts from him throughout his career. The tournament game, the Duke game a few years ago, the Pitt game a few years ago. Cormac Ryan really propelled Notre Dame to wins those days. And if he can do that consistently, in addition to his defense, he has the potential to be the best player on next year's team. And it's huge for Notre Dame that he's returning. If Cormac Ryan can really step up and be kind of the guy offensively on his shot and just not be scared to take shots and show his ability off the bounce, I think Notre Dame could be almost as good or maybe even better than they were this year. It's hard to fill a Blake Wesley and Prentiss Hubb size hole, but if you have a backcourt of a transfer point guard, Cormac Ryan, who definitely has the potential to take a leap next year, and then Dane Goodwin, who I'm going to get into in a minute, that is a backcourt that can really be successful. And obviously, all Notre Dame fans wanted Blake Wesley to come back and kind of be the focal point of that offense alongside J.J. Starling. But Cormac Ryan, I think, can really step into a bigger role offensively now, and he can start every game, which seems to be a role he's better than being a sixth man. He always seems to talk about that he likes starting more and gets a better feel for the game. Now he's got the opportunity to do that, got the opportunity to have a bigger role offensively, be the main leader on this team, and really can set the tone defensively like he did this year. No matter what was happening, Cormac Ryan always played with intensity defensively and kept their head above water on that end and was going to guard the best player, was going to give someone a hard time on that end. And having a guy to set the tone defensively and a guy who can potentially have a breakout year offensively is huge for Notre Dame. And Cormac Ryan's return will not get all that much buzz like a Blake Wesley return would, but Cormac Ryan can be a really productive player next year. And if he can take a leap, Notre Dame is going to be a really good team next year alongside J.J. Starling and Dane Goodwin and maybe Nate Laszewski. And I think maybe a transfer point guard, a good big man that they get out of the portal, Cormac Ryan could be really useful, and he could be a huge part of this team, not only scoring-wise. This year we saw Cormac do all the little things, played great defense, dove after every loose ball, set the tone, was a leader. You saw him do all that. Now it's time for Cormac Ryan to consistently break out offensively like we've seen him be able to do. And if he can do that, Notre Dame's a completely different team, and a team that I don't think a lot of teams in the ACC are better than. And a lot hinges on Cormac Ryan's offensive development next year, but the other stuff you're going to get, and that's almost as big of a part of his game and his appeal to Notre Dame than the offense. So huge that Notre Dame can bring Cormac Ryan back. I think he has one of the higher ceilings offensively in this group and higher ceilings as a player, although he may not have the athleticism of actually, I think he is a pretty solid athlete. I wouldn't say that, but I'm not sure he is the explosive star guard that Blake Wesley was, but man, Cormac Ryan can be a really productive player next year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do and kind of the role he had in 2020, 2021. And a guy who kind of had an opposite season this year, had a massive breakout year, maybe didn't do it in a super flashy way, but Dane Goodwin was awesome. Shot over 50% from the field, had 13 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, and really emerged in that aspect. I think that was one of the more underrated storylines, was Nate Laszewski and Dane Goodwin's rebounding. Dane's a guy who was really Notre Dame's stabilizer offensively. You always knew he was going to take good shots, and when Dane Goodwin was screwing up, you knew Notre Dame was in for a rough night. Like the first PC game, when Dane Goodwin made a careless turnover, I knew that game was over in a second. And he hasn't really done that at all recently. And that was a huge part of Notre Dame's success. Obviously, he had a really rough end of the year. Let's see the game logs. 3 points against Alabama, and then not much before that. 10 points against Pitt, 6 against FSU, 17 against GT in a game they scored 90 points, 7 against Cuse in a game that Dane Goodwin's the catalyst in the middle of that zone. I thought he would have had a bigger outing. Wake Forest, he had 3. I think throughout the year we kind of realized that as Dane Goodwin goes, this team goes. They're going to have a really hard time winning games when Dane Goodwin isn't hitting shots. And I think Notre Dame has an opportunity this year to kind of be more intentional about getting Dane Goodwin his looks. I thought last year, for all that Prentiss and Blake did for this team, I think Bray became a little over-reliant on them at times and kind of forgot about Dane. Obviously, Dane can't create his own looks as well as those two, which is a part of why he didn't get as many shots. But if they can get Dane looks and consistently run him off flares or just straight-up screens, I think Dane could be in for another huge year. Throughout pretty much, say, like mid-January, early February, Dane Goodwin was the model of consistency. Basically, I think he scored double figures until, like, let's see when the first game he had less than double figures was. It was Duke. Dane Goodwin from early November until the Duke game, which was mid-January, the last day of January, was the first time Dane Goodwin didn't score double figures this year. And that's huge for Notre Dame. If Dane Goodwin can come back and just be consistent, we know Dane Goodwin isn't going to take over a game offensively. He's not going to be a guy who is going to ISO guys and take guys off the bounce all that much, but Dane's going to sit in his spots. He's going to run off screens, going to hit his shots. And the mid-range was a huge development this year as well. And even a little bit off the dribble ability from Dane Goodwin, just 1 or 2 bounces, getting into his spot, rising up and hitting a shot was huge for Dane Goodwin. I think he expanded his game a little more than most people realized, and has kind of become a little more than just a shooter. He's a guy who can get to the rim once in a while, is a little crafty around the rim, and can get to his spots and rise up from the mid-range. And Dane Goodwin expanded his game a little bit. I'd love to see him be more like the early part of the year Dane Goodwin, and that any Dane Goodwin for Notre Dame next year, as much of a threat he is huge for Notre Dame. And the versatility he brings is also something I'm really looking forward to seeing on this team. If they want to run with 2 bigs, they can and put him at the 3. If they want to go small ball, which works at times, may not work all that as much next year, they can put him at the 4 and he can do that effectively. So just having a piece like Dane that you can put in the lineup, you know what you're getting every night, and just having a guy like that is huge for Notre Dame. And the two returners are massive deals that Notre Dame's getting those guys back. J.J. Starling is going to have some veterans that have played in the tournament before around him. He's going to have guys that are guys who can help him offensively. He doesn't have to be the guy offensively, especially if they get a point guard. JJ can kind of play at his own pace. He can be a complimentary piece some nights. If they need him to take over, he can do that. And he's not pigeonholed into being the superstar guy that they have to turn to every night. And that's huge. And that's maybe the biggest development with Cormac and Dane. Those guys are guys we're going to be talking about all off season. So subscribe for more Notre Dame men's basketball content. Really enjoyed covering this year and covering the off season so far. Notre Dame will probably get some sort of commitment from the portal soon, so be sure to tune in for that. And I'll be back talking about more decisions soon. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back whenever some news breaks or whenever I think it's something to fill. So thank you guys, and peace.